Hi guys, and welcome to tonight's webinar. So tonight we're going to be looking at teaching task 1C, the creative sequenced arrangement. So just to start off then, so we've got a few bits happening tonight. Unfortunately, when we get to looking at one of the sequences from last year, I still haven't managed to get a second piece of audio, so the sound's not going to work, unfortunately. But just to let you know that, I'm just going to walk you through how I would set up a Task 1C project. It's something that I get asked quite a bit, so it's going to be something that I want to just cover ever so slightly, just to make sure that you give your students the best possible start. And we're going to cover that in more depth in a minute about how to start this project, making sure they stay on focus. This is the one where they don't focus. This is one where they've lost all concentration, and you're going to have to work your hardest to keep them on track. So, the content for tonight, we're obviously going to look at the mark scheme, just look at the downfalls, look at the places where they might stumble. We're going to look at time management. Big issue in my early days, and I'm saying this about 100 million times now, but big issue in my early days is the time management of this. And getting that right is absolutely key to the success. Then we'll look at what the students need to know. That's when we'll actually look at a project and setting it up properly. We'll look at the logbook, making sure we don't lose those key marks. Now this is the one where you're going to have 10 marks for question 9 and 10 marks for question 10. So we cannot lose those marks. They become vital in jumping from one grade to the next. If you don't maximise those marks, and they're fairly easy to get, ridiculously so even, if we don't get those marks, your students are gonna miss out on a grade boundary. So we need to make sure we get that absolutely right. And then we're going to do a Q&A. So if you guys are around tonight, we're using the Google Plus Hangout page and a live events page. So you guys are going to be able to ask a question using the Q&A button. I think I've worked out how to do it this week, so I should be able to answer you. I'm sorry to the person that gave me a question last week and I didn't see it there, so I really apologise about that. But this week I've got it sorted and I've got it up in front of me, so any questions that come in during the show I'm going to be able to answer, and obviously during the Q&A section I'll also answer them then as well. So let's look at the mark scheme. What have we got? The core pieces of marking that you're looking at 22 marks. The first 6 is how you incorporate the song, how you use the song, making sure you choose the right song, making sure you choose the right elements from the song, and kind of pushing those elements forward creatively. The second one is how you use the style. Do you understand what the style requires? Is it coherent to the examiner? Is it coherent to the listener that it should be in that style? You know, do you know your house from your dubstep, for instance? And this is going to be important, especially if you choose house. And then finally, the use of technology. 10 marks, that's a big one. The use of technology is a big one. Now, I've guided my students on this one down the house route. The reason so is because the use of filters, the use of sampling, the use of effects is massive. You've got the use of effects for reggae, and I like reggae, and reggae is a real good subject for me. But actually, I think you might limit your students, if you push them down that route, you might limit your students with this particular use of technology, okay? Whereas with the house, I think you'll nail it every single time. There's so much use of technology that you're going to nail it every single time. And you can look with this, if you go down the house route, you can look at more advanced settings, like sorry, is it completely gone out of my head? But you can look at more advanced settings and more advanced filtering and more advanced automation and things like that. So that's why I'm pushing my guys down the route of house. I'm not too worried about the song that they're choosing, but I have guided them a little bit. I've said to them, look, I'm going to do Seven Nation Army, and I'm going to make it into a house track. That's the one I'm going to be doing first this year. So that's the way I'm guiding my students. And you're going to want to kind of, so they don't lose too much time, you're probably going to want to limit their choices. Choices is the killer for this particular task. This is having that amount of choice. It throws the students into a bit of a wobbly. They'll start, and this has happened to me so many years. They start a project, and they start down the house route, and they start down the Seven Nation Army route, and then they see their friend just across from them is motoring along because they've chosen reggae, and I want it that way. So they've gone, no sir, I'm going to start doing it that way. And actually, a week later, their mate has hit a massive stumbling block, and all of a sudden, they've also hit another stumbling block. And the point is they're going to need to do the research. Whichever way they decide to go, there's going to be points where they're going to struggle. So they can't lose heart when they see someone else doing better, and they need to keep focused and stay on track. So, and then the other ones are the optionals. Now, you're going to get 3 of these optionals. All of them are going to be marked out of 6 each, but the examiner will only take the top 3. So don't worry about that too much, because they will all be marked. But when you're checking your students' work, just make sure that that they have covered all 6 marks. Let's look over at the mark scheme for this, and let's just have a look at a couple of stumbling blocks. And once again, it's the same with all the pieces of work. Is they're always going to say to you, okay, how well am I doing? And the first thing I send all of my students to is the stumbling blocks. Okay, have you met this criteria? Have you met this criteria? Once again, the examiner is going to look at the holistic and the detailed. Okay, so in referencing the holistic, they would have already done their detailed mark. Sorry, I just whizzed past it there. So for each of these sections, they're going to do a detailed mark, give them a mark for each of these, collate all the marks. So for instance, if the marks all come to 25, they're then going to look into this mark band and say, okay, this is competent. And then they're going to read the descriptor. And if the work that they've just listened to matches the descriptor entirely, they'll say, okay, fantastic. Can I give it a few more marks? Or should I knock it down a bit? Okay, so making sure they reach the descriptors is absolutely paramount. If they don't reach the descriptors because there's errors or misjudgments, or if you look down a bit further where there's not enough work submitted, so remembering that this piece does have to be between 2 and 3 minutes, obviously they're not going to get past that. If they don't fulfill the whole descriptor for this mark band, they will not get past that mark grade. Okay, so really important that you kind of guide them through that process as well. So okay, well, you're missing out on here, so I can't give you any higher than a 5 or whatever. And it comes back here, use of stimulus, arrangement too short. So straight away, if it's not 2 minutes long, they cannot get any more than 1 for that mark. And also, and it affects them here as well. So if it's insufficient work has been submitted, they can't get past 5, full stop, even if they've done really well with certain areas of it. Okay, so making sure that they realise that. Does not reflect the chosen style, and the examiner will know this if you haven't done your research, because it's all written down in your logbook. Questions 9 and 10 go massively into details about this, and making sure that they have done their research, and I'll come on to that in just a second. Use of music technology. So what music technology have they used? What kind of process have they used? What kind of automation? What kind of articulation and phrasing? What kind of balance? Is it a complete mix? Does it look good? Okay. Inappropriate choice of timbre. So if you look at the mark scheme for task 1A, you'll notice that a lot of the stuff that they're expecting here in task 1A and 1B, it was kind of put under different headings, but they've kind of grouped all that together now. So make sure that they know exactly what they're going to get marked for. Okay. Okay, so then you get to the optional ones. And once again, just read through the descriptors and make an appropriate choice onto whether you think they hit the bands. If they don't hit the bands, you're going to have to give them feedback and kind of walk them through that, okay? Let's go back. Okay, sorry about this. So here we go. So that was the mark scheme. And make sure you give your students a copy of the mark scheme. And what I tend to do every kind of term or so, I get them to go through the mark scheme and just highlight the key phrases that they think they're not hitting. It gives them a better understanding of how they're missing out on marks as well. Okay, so time management. The inclination for this task is to start it after you finish task 1A and finish task 1B. Don't do that. You will not leave yourself enough time at the end. You will lose a lot of marks because you haven't done the preparation. The preparation for this task takes quite a long time, especially if they're not used to doing arrangements, okay? So I tend to start the research at the end of term 1. That will be their half-term project, as it was. I'll give them a pro forma, and I'll try and knock up a pro forma and put it on with this post as well, so you can have that. But I give them a pro forma of all the research that they need to do. and get them to write it down, get them to listen to the tracks, of which if they just do a quick search for, say, Bob Marley or David Guetta, straight away on the video page for YouTube, hundreds and hundreds of their tracks come up. I then get them to look at the key features of the style, make sure they write them down so they can incorporate them into their actual song. So once again, making sure that they make wise choices. There is no room for massive trial and error. There is no room for them to kind of pick and choose later on. They do need to be very firm about the decisions that they're making, okay? And I've said about starting the project early. So the way in which I would go about this task. So guiding your students, the worst thing you can do is assume that they know how to do arranging. The good thing about this task is it is an arranging task. It's not a composition. So they get to kind of steal elements from the song and they get to steal elements from the style. So effectively, if they start themselves a big ideas board or a mood board or whatever you want to call it, they can literally just use those ideas and copy and paste them into different sections as they develop their piece. So in terms of that, as they see a good idea, there's no harm, no foul in them actually copying those ideas and then writing them in their logbook so they can actually get marks in the logbook as well. For say, actually, in David Guetta's song, I saw this low pass filter effect that kind of goes from nothing to full or whatever way round it is. And I've incorporated that in the intro of my piece. And there's no harm in that. And then explaining how they've achieved that effect. There is 10 marks. You can write those points in the logbook as bullet points. So, get that started early as well. Make sure they create themselves a Word document. As they kind of research these elements, make sure the Word document, or their logbook as it is, questions 8, 9 and 10, are being filled in as they go. So, don't leave it to the last minute because they're going to forget how they've developed this piece. With all the best will in the world, we all forget how we developed it, especially when you get further on down and think, oh, how did I get to this fantastic piece? And all of a sudden, you've forgotten it. So as they go, make sure that they are filling in that logbook or keeping notes about that logbook. Logic and Cubase both have good note-taking devices as well built in, so they could even use that if they don't want to use Word or whatever. So the first thing I do is set up the project as I mean to go on. And that basically means I'll work out a general layout for my piece. So if I've chosen a house track, I'll go and listen to some David Guetta or listen to some Mars, and I will count the bars for each of the sections, give them appropriate names, and then lay them out in Logic. Using the marker tracks in Logic, and I'll show you that in a bit, I've just laid them out in Logic, making sure each section is accounted for. I'll colorise the section so it's easy to come to. And then at the end of all the sections, I'll make sure it fulfills my 2 to 3 minutes. And then I can start jotting out all the parts. Once I've done that, I'm then going to find a common tempo for my style. I will try and relate it back to the song as well, but actually at this point I'm going to focus on the style more than the song because I want to make sure that the song is replicating the style. I'm going to get more marks, in my opinion, if I go for the style at the beginning. So I'm going to first make sure I get the structure right or appropriate to the style. Then I'm going to make sure I get an appropriate tempo. Now there's some really good beat calculators online, so if they're listening to a few tracks, use the beat calculator online to actually work out what the tempo are. You've obviously got the footprints as well that you can have a look at, but using a beat calculator, there's no better reference point. So we've said about common structures. Now the next thing is working out the key. Now the key I will take from the song because transferring the data from the lead sheet they've given us, including the chords and all the melodic parts, is going to be easier if they use the same key signature and the same key, whether it be major or minor as well. It's going to be easier unless the style requires it to be minor, for instance. So making sure that they kind of take that into full effect. So that's the point where I'm going to use the key. And at this point, I've got my students to write this straight in the logbook because it's valuable information. Straight away, they've shown their research. They've shown how they've come up with these decisions. So straight away, out of 20 marks, for those 3 points, they've just got 3 marks. Job done. Tick them off. Chord progression is the next one. So once we work out the key, you've got a choice. You use the same chord progression as the style is what I would do, but try and manipulate it for the song as well. So if you've got this nice chord sequence of E minor or F and whatever else, you then try and manipulate that to what's appropriate for the style based on what's the song. So That's a little bit more tricky, but I will go through that in some depth once I start creating my version in a couple of weeks' time, which you can find that on musictechstudent.co.uk, and you can also find last year's trance one, which is where these screenshots have come from. So head on over there and have a little look. The next thing, the thing that you're going to get a lot of marks for, is instrumentation. Making sure you identify the instrumentation needed for your style, and making sure you identify the instrumentation needed for your song. Write them down and then say which ones you've used, and that's going to get you some more marks as well. Once again, I would tend to err on the side of the style, but closely relate them, because you can say, okay, I've used these instruments for the style, but I've incorporated the guitar part from the song on this instrument, and that's going to get the marks as well. Just showing how you've combined the two elements. The next thing is probably one of the first things that I input is the drum pan. I find that if I'm going to put my data in real time or with just a step input or the piano roll, having a drum kit to work to rather than a click or just the grid makes the piece come alive a lot sooner. So I will tend to kind of jot down all of my drum parts straight away into these kind of like bars, and you can see here I've actually come up with these little 1-bar phrases for my drums. And then later on, as you can see here, I've just dropped them into the sections how I'm going to use them. So I've got my clipboard, as it were, and then I've just dropped them into the sections as I'm going to use them. So that's a fantastic way of just developing these ideas. Once again though, I have taken these ideas from a house track, and you may even find that the media library, if you go down to the MIDI library, I'm not sure if you're allowed to use these in the actual thing, but to get ideas from, there's nothing better. Going into a media library and just having a look at the way that these things are put together. It might just be that you have to recreate these parts for yourself, but taking ideas is paramount in this particular arrangement. Loads of use for technology, as said before, but the technology for me, once I start putting my filter effects in, once I start putting my compression effects in, because they use, it's gone completely out of my head tonight. I'm not sure what that compression is called. Sidechain compression. God blimey, must be late. So yeah, they use sidechain compression quite a bit to get that pulsy effect. And I'll start adding those sorts of things in later to start building up the technology aspect of it. And then we are going to have to look at phrasing as well as the piece develops, and making sure that we've used lots of articulation, and lots of the same techniques that we used in task 1A will be relevant for this task. Okay, so everything they've learned in task 1B, everything they've learned in task 1A, feel free to kind of use it in this one as well. The logbook. Now question 8 is identical to question 2, so you're just listing the instruments that you've used in your piece, and you're writing about how you got the sound. So you're writing about, okay, the virtual instrument that you used first off, the initial preset that you used, and then how you've developed that sound. So how you've kind of manipulated the envelope, how you've manipulated the cut-off frequencies, all the filter and effects, or your oscillators and all the rest of it. Anything that you do that is outside of the preset should be talked about. You don't have a lot of room for this. You only have one page, so make sure you keep your descriptions short. One paragraph per instrument is what I would suggest. And once again, I always get my students to do this in a Word document. It makes no sense because, yeah, you need to write this down as you go. Otherwise, you're going to forget it. Okay, so the big ones, question 9 and question 10. These can be done in bullet points or they can be done in continuous prose. I pretty much always get my guys to do them in bullet points and bullet point them all out, and I always say to them, look, a minimum of 10 points, okay? A minimum of 10 points. Make sure that you have a minimum of 10 points so we can actually get those marks. It actually doesn't take 10 points to get the marks if they're really good, but at least by putting 10 points in that are relevant, that are well structured, you stand more of a chance. You have to focus on, for question 9, you have to focus on melody, harmony, rhythm, texture and instrumentation, form and structure based on the song. So anything that you've used that is based on the song goes into question 9. And this is how I get them to phrase their bullet points. I'll first say, okay, treat it like a question and answer. So treat the question as, which instrument or section are you referring to? So straight away, I'm referring to the intro guitar. Okay, and then you can say, what have you done to this? How have you developed this sound? Okay, to make it fit with the house style, I've put this onto a lead synth, and I've done this kind of automation, or I've done such to it, and that's how you're going to get them up. This kind of idea of question and answer. So where you can locate this in the song, in the original song, sorry, and how you've manipulated it for your arrangement. If you want a full list of examples, I've got in the members area, I've got this post here that you can go onto, and there's about 4 or 5 examples for each of these reference points. So there's about 4 or 5 for melody, and the same for harmony, rhythm, texture. So if you want that and you're a member of musictechstudent.co.uk, you'll find that page, and all the reference points are there for you. Okay, now question 10, this is all about the style now. So identify the most important features of the chosen style and explain how you've used them in your arrangement. So same drill as before, identify the fingerprint or the footprint, and then talk about how you've used them in your piece. It's okay saying this is the footprint, and you can waffle on for that as much as you want, but if you actually haven't used it in your piece, it's unlikely that you're going to get the mark. So referencing the point at which you've used it in your piece could become important if you feel that the examiner will overlook that, okay? The reggae footprints have already been done, sorry, the fingerprints have already been done, stylistic fingerprints, and you can find them on this reggae page. The house one, I will get that sorted once I start doing my 1C in approximately 2 or 3 weeks time, so you'll have that one as well to kind of reference against. Okay, the Q&A, keeping the pressure off, making sure that you monitor your students' progression at all times, gonna be key. This, as I said in the beginning, this is the one where they're gonna lose their motivation, they're gonna lose that kind of momentum. Start it early and keep on top of them, making sure that they are doing these things, okay? So here's the first question. We're thinking of purchasing a vocal booth. As you've suggested, what size would you recommend? Right, so the recommendation for a vocal booth, I have got in my sequencing lab, and I've put it in my sequencing lab because that is the best place to put it. You don't actually need, or you can't use audio for task 1C, just to clarify. But in task 3C and in task, pretty much all the way through A2, you will need a vocal booth. So the one I use is 2 foot by 4 foot. I had the choice of going for a 2 foot by 2 foot, but really that would have limited me for the bigger instruments, like getting a double bass in there or getting a snare in there alongside. Really, a 4x4 is it a 4x4 or 2? I think I said that wrong. Sorry, I've got a 4x6. Oh my goodness. God, it's been a long day. A 4x6. So a 4x4 is really ideal for just vocals. The 4x6 gives you so much more scope. I can literally do all my recording in the booth minus a full-on drum kit. So yeah, I would definitely go for that. And I got a fantastic deal on mine. I bought an X demo from a company in Manchester. For the life of me, I can't remember the name. Maybe it was Saltwater or something like that, or Sweetwater. I can't remember. But they did me an excellent deal on an X demo, which is a platinum vocal booth from their range. And it should have been 8 or 9 grand, and I got it for, I think it was 2 grand. It was cheap. And if you go on eBay, you can probably get the same deal, to be fair. And with a bit of a touch up, it looks like new. Okay, so hopefully that answers that one. So the next thing on the list is, let's go and have a look at this sequence from last year, just so you guys can see how I broke it down. Actually, before we start that, let's just see if we've got anyone else in the house. Questions? No, none there. So please send through your questions if you have any. Let's just have a quick refresh on this page, see if there's any questions come through on this page. No, so we're good to go. So let's go and have a look at my sequence from last year. How many times? So I've got about 6 minutes. Sorry about this, I didn't have it ready. I thought I did, and I didn't. I've been rubbish again. Here it is now, so let's go there. I can't show you the audio because for some reason Google Hangouts only lets me have one piece of audio, only lets me have my voice. So I'm looking at some software that I think hopefully when we get to doing the mixing and recording webinars after the half term, I'll have that all ready, so you'll be good to go. Now, this is how I set out my screen or my thing. So straight away, I'll get them to add the marker tracks. So here's a marker track in Logic, and we've literally just labelled each of them retrospective to what in this case it's a trance track, retrospective to what a trance track would look like. So each of the sections has been looked at, and I've scaled out how many bars for each section it would be appropriate, how the kind of structure fits together, the breakdowns and how it develops, and I've written some quite in-depth notes for myself about how these parts developed. Now, you're going to need to keep on top of your students with this because they're not generally they're not very good at kind of doing this, and I like to get this structure done. The problem is they tend to change their minds. So whereas I'll be quite structured about it, I'll realise that this is the structure that I want, and I'll pretty much stick to it. But if they change their mind, they can move these marker tracks around. It's not a problem, but just kind of make sure that they're aware that it does have to be in the style. After laying down the marker tracks, I'll then lay down the instrument tracks based on the instruments that I need for trance and developing that. I started off with just a drum kit, but as you can see, I've separated each of the parts out, done all my mixing. How else have I developed it? I also had this clip bank. Now, where's my clip bank gone? Maybe I had it at the end. I think, actually thinking about it, I put it on a different sequencer track. So I actually imported the tracks from a different clipboard sequencer in another project, and that's fine. So once you play around with it, you can see all my drum parts here. Once they've been separated out, I've just kind of chucked them into play, see what worked, make sure the fills work, and whatever else. That once I've done that, I've then inputted the tempo. So I was listening to what was the track that I was listening to? Adagio. Was it Adagio I was listening to? I can't remember the artist now. But anyway, I realised that the track for this was it 120? 138? 138, yeah, 138. So I put that in straight away. I also heard this 2/4 section here. So I kind of manipulated the sample track, and that's fairly easy to do if I can remember. Sorry, I can't find my extra tracks. I think it's not there. Those are my markers. So I'm still getting used to the Logic 10, but up here you have a tempo track somewhere. I bet someone's screaming at the screen now. It's there, it's there, it's there. I can't remember where it is. Oh. No, it's not there. Anyway, I set up the tempo in this area, and this was a Logic 9 project. That's why I was a bit more familiar with how to get to it. No, it's not doing it either. I've just done something to my track. It doesn't matter. And so on. Yeah, so I put a 2/4 section in there. I also worked out the key from the off of each of these sections and wrote them down in my logbook to make sure I had the keys written down and all the chord progressions. Once I had the chord progression, the key, the tempo, the layout, the instrumentation, I then set about putting the drum tracks in. So I laid out all the drums as I wanted them. Then I laid down the next part, which was the chords. So we based out the chords straight away, and then we put the bass synth down, and it just developed like that. And once you get a good idea about the structure, building these pieces up is fairly simple, but you will need to guide your students on this pretty much the whole way. So let's minimize that. Let's go back to my main screen. Let's see if anyone's come in for a bit of a chat. Doesn't look like we've got anyone tonight, not to worry. Now, next week we have task 3C, which should be a good one. That's the last of the coursework. Then we're going to run one for the new teachers amongst us that are thinking of running the music tech course, and basically just saying what equipment you're going to be needing if you want to run it, either as a basic or as a more advanced centre. Some kind of ideal setups for that. And then next term we're going to start looking at recording and mixing techniques, which should be really, really good. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed tonight's webinar. please feel free to email me. Please feel free to get in touch, and don't forget to sign up for next week's webinar. I will post a tweet about it, and it will be on all my social media pages and musictechstudent.co.uk music pages, and I will see you next week.